Queen Elizabeth I was the last Tudor monarch who reigned over the golden age of England, but her rule was paid with poisoned blood. She was the daughter of two infamous figures in history, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, and her rise to power was as extraordinary as her ability to maintain it. One of her secrets was to present to the world a figure so iconic as to be awe-inspiring. She was so successful at the illusion that she would eventually be known as the Virgin Queen. But even the most beautiful and powerful cannot escape from the cruel hands of age. So how did Elizabeth defy time? And what sacrifices did she make to grasp at the fountain of youth? Join us as we dig into the past and fast forward through the life of Queen Elizabeth I. You will not want to miss the shocking and lethal beauty secrets of one of England's most revered royals. Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, gave Henry a daughter, Mary, but failed to produce a male heir. Henry consequently turned to the alluring Anne Boleyn. After a 7-year pursuit of an annulment from the Roman Catholic Church, Henry discovered that Anne was pregnant. Could she be carrying the son and heir that the king longed for? The king took drastic measures and daringly broke with the Catholic Church, freeing himself to marry his second wife. On September 7th, 1533, their daughter Elizabeth was born, bringing hope of a growing family and the potential of a male heir for Henry. Anne desperately tried to provide her new husband with a son to secure her and Elizabeth's future. But after 2 miscarriages, the king's affection had waned. Sadly for Anne, she was unjustly tried and convicted of treason and adultery, sent to the Tower of London, and met an untimely end. Following her mother's death, Elizabeth, who was only 2 years old, was declared illegitimate and her royal status was removed. This was just the first of several scandalous events that would shape Elizabeth's early years. She would eventually rise to become one of the longest and most successful monarchs in English history, but her formative years were far from storybook. Much of Elizabeth's adolescence was spent in the shadow of the court at Hatfield Castle, away from the political intrigue of her father's court. Despite being motherless and illegitimate, Elizabeth displayed a natural acumen and intelligence, much like her father. She excelled at a wide range of subjects, including languages, theology, logic, and rhetoric, and her intense study, as well as the care from her immediate guardians, helped shape her into a confident young lady determined to prove herself. Despite her intellectual prowess, Elizabeth was often neglected, as evidenced by her governess, who wrote to her father about her ill-fitting clothes and lack of petticoat. Family life eased somewhat with the birth of Elizabeth's younger half-brother, Edward VI, the son of King Henry VIII, and his third wife, Lady Jane Seymour. Jane passed shortly after giving birth, and while the siblings were close, the daughters were not fully embraced by the king. It wasn't until Henry's 6th and final wife, Catherine Parr, encouraged the aging king to reunite the family did the sisters fully return to court. Parr even influenced the king to reinstate Elizabeth and Mary to the line of succession, but their reunion with their father was short-lived. In 1547, King Henry VIII died, and Elizabeth's brother, the 9-year-old Edward VI, was crowned king. Elizabeth was now third in line to the throne and quickly received a marriage proposal from Edward's uncle, Thomas Seymour. Elizabeth tactfully denied the proposal, stating that she was mourning the loss of her father, but this was not the last of her entanglements with Seymour. Thomas Seymour was a handsome and charismatic man, but behind this veil was a shallow, overly ambitious figure. After being rejected by the 14-year-old princess, Seymour set his sights on her stepmother, the recently widowed Dowager Queen Catherine Parr. Despite objections from the council and the king, Seymour and Catherine married in secret. The news was scandalous and rocked the royal court. Catherine, who had been a trusted guardian to Elizabeth, invited her to join their newly united household at Chelsea Manor. Little could have prepared Elizabeth for what happened next. Seymour now had access to the tall, fair-skinned, dark-eyed beauty. Although he was married to Catherine, he continued to pursue Elizabeth. One morning, she woke to find Seymour in her bed. It was the first of several early morning intrusions. Nervous about the optics of Seymour's impropriety, Elizabeth resorted to waking earlier and earlier. Seymour seemed to have Catherine Parr convinced that it was all horseplay. On one occasion, Catherine held Elizabeth down in the garden as Seymour cut her dress into pieces. The situation became intolerable when the now pregnant Catherine Parr discovered Seymour and Elizabeth alone and in an embrace. Left with little choice, she sent Elizabeth away. Was it a bid to dispel rumours to protect her marriage, or was Catherine rescuing Elizabeth from additional torment? It's hard to say. Several months later, Catherine Parr fell sick and passed away shortly after childbirth, and it wasn't long before Seymour would again ensnare Elizabeth in controversy. In a bid to gain power, the now widowed Thomas Seymour embroiled Elizabeth in an absurd plot to kidnap his nephew, King Edward VI, and marry Elizabeth to become the de facto King of England. Seymour's ambition would lead to his downfall, and he was later charged with 33 counts of treason and executed at the Tower of London. Although Elizabeth denied any interest in Seymour and his schemes, their relationship came under intense scrutiny. Elizabeth was imprisoned at the Tower of London by her then 11-year-old brother Edward, and her reputation and loyalty to the crown were dangerously in question. Elizabeth was subjected to a series of interrogations and used all of her intellect to satisfy the crown of both her virtue and allegiance. Despite her success in pleading her case, Elizabeth learned a valuable lesson. In a male-dominated society, her virtue had to be safeguarded at all costs. Elizabeth now understood that any man who came into her life would likely have one eye on her heart and another on her power. Unfortunately, this was not the last time Elizabeth would find herself imprisoned by a sibling and forced to defend her loyalty. In 1553, Edward's reign came to a premature end when he passed away at the age of 15. Edward was a Protestant and did not want his oldest sister Mary, a staunch Catholic, to take the throne. Edward signed a will disinheriting his half-sisters. Instead, his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, would inherit the throne. But Mary had other plans. Backed by the people of England, Mary quickly assembled a force and dethroned her cousin in just a matter of 9 days. Elizabeth fully supported Mary's coup to be the next monarch. Her ascendancy grew fearful that Elizabeth had sinister intentions. New royals are fast prey to paranoia. Elizabeth found herself implicated in Wyatt's Rebellion, a plot to overthrow Mary and reinstate a Protestant monarch. Despite never being put on trial, Elizabeth was sent to the Tower of London for a second time and interrogated for 8 weeks about her faith and loyalty. Fortunately, Elizabeth's quick wit and charisma allowed her to prove her innocence and avoid her demise. This experience reinforced Elizabeth's belief that the Catholic-Protestant debate was divisive and dangerous. She learned how religion caused intense conflict and that it was best to avoid it. Elizabeth remained under house arrest for several months until Mary passed away, allowing Elizabeth to ascend to the throne herself. It was November 1558 when Elizabeth succeeded to the throne, but England's future was uncertain. The country was divided by religion and isolated in European politics. During Queen Mary's final years, England witnessed failed military campaigns, food shortages, and the return of the plague. But it wasn't long before Queen Elizabeth I rejuvenated the country and cultivated a golden era. In her first speech as queen, she had promised to rule by good advice and counsel, and unlike her father, Henry VIII, and sister, Mary I, she did not rush into expensive foreign wars. Instead, she carefully promoted negotiation and unity, renewed the currency, which stimulated the economy, and invested in the navy to protect English merchants from piracy. Elizabeth's prosperous 45-year reign peaked at the dawn of the British Empire, and changed the future of England. She mediated peace between Catholics and Protestants, established social and economic regulation, and also supported many grand expeditions across the Americas. These explorations prepared the country for a golden era where the arts flourished and colonization plus trade expansion furthered England's global position. So, how was Elizabeth I so successful where others had failed? Having grown up in the shadow of the royal court, she observed the pitfalls that other leaders had fallen into. She navigated the subjects of religion, marriage, and childbirth with caution. To overcome the dangers of the crown, she used two strengths that had helped her survive her entire life: her ability to mask her true feelings and enthrall people with her beauty. Elizabeth understood that image was everything, and she would use this as her ultimate political tactic. The ploy worked, and she rallied the public behind her. Queen Elizabeth I was deeply devoted to England and famously refused to marry. Undoubtedly, remaining unwed allowed the Queen to protect her power and authority. To the public, however, it was viewed as self-sacrifice, a virtuous act that kept the country out of foreign, political, and religious conflicts. After rejecting notable proposals, Elizabeth was bestowed by the people the title Virgin Queen, a moniker she embraced and would use to great effect. In 1559, she declared herself already joined in marriage to a husband, namely the Kingdom of England, and added that she was married to England the moment she received the coronation ring, a ring that she refused to remove at any cost, even as it would later grow into her flesh. Her doctors recommended having the ring surgically removed because it was causing physical harm. The Queen still refused to part with it and passed away a week later. Her Lady of the Bedchamber refused to allow her body to be inspected post-mortem, which led to speculation regarding her demise. Was it pneumonia, streptococcus, cancer, or could it have been the Queen's vanity and the intense desire to maintain her carefully crafted image? All monarchs are highly visible and powerful, but Elizabeth I, being a woman, was even more so, and she had tremendous control of her image. This control was demonstrated in her outward appearance at court, and she employed certain beauty secrets that were very much a part of her self-mastery. The enhanced features of these products made her presence so elegant that the women of the court and noble families emulated her style to a great extent. Her fine clothing was a true reflection of authority, wealth, and status, and her lavish style was extremely expensive. The public was very much aware of her brutally self-disciplined persona, where her physical appearance endorsed a representation of her country. Elizabeth did not just rely on her public persona to demonstrate her dominance. She also leaned on her constructed image and used portraiture as propaganda. The Queen would commission portraits loaded with holiness symbolism, as if she were the Virgin Mary herself, or the chaste classical goddess Diana. It was important that she was viewed as equal to her male counterparts, so she built her youth into her strength. Elizabeth meticulously controlled these works of propaganda. If she disliked any of the portraits, she would have them destroyed. The Queen made every effort to create her own sense of timelessness, particularly towards the end of her reign. But how was she going to measure up to the idealized version of herself as she aged and when making public appearances? This became even more difficult when the 29-year-old beauty contracted smallpox in the spring of 1562. Thankfully, she survived this highly contagious and deadly disease, but her skin was left pockmarked. To overcome her new vulnerable self, Elizabeth had the mirrors in her room removed, and in a desperate attempt to hide her blemished skin, she began a very dangerous beauty regimen. Thick layers of Venetian ceruse, also known as the spirits of Saturn, were applied daily, a foul-smelling toxic substance made of vinegar and lead. Since it was not common practice to wash your face every day, Elizabeth would freshen up by continually applying additional layers of Venetian ceruse. By week's end, it would be bedded up to an inch thick. When it was time to wash off the poisonous substance, the commonly used facial cleanser had more ingredients that could kill. It consisted of rose water, honey, eggshells, and mercury. Although this concoction would have left her skin feeling soft and smooth, the mercury component was quietly eating away at her flesh and poisoning her blood. To top off the look, the Queen would routinely apply cinnabar to her lips. Later known as the kiss of death, it was an ore of oxidized mercury and heavy metals that the Queen used faithfully. Little did she know that when too much is accumulated in the body, mercury gets absorbed through the gut and skin and is known to cause memory loss, depression, and in some cases, death. This vicious cycle of applying thick, lethal aids to cover the skin, then removing it with harmful cleaners, went on for years. Nearing the end of her reign, Elizabeth had lost most of her hair and experienced symptoms of depression, memory loss, and digestive problems, all symptoms of lead and mercury poisoning. In a never-ending bid to disguise her damaged skin, isn't it ironic how her deadly mask of youth is how she felt safe to hold on to her power? Queen Elizabeth I had the beauty and cunning of her mother and the fierce doggedness of her father. She was the last monarch of the Tudor house and ruled over the Elizabethan age of England. Her rule ushered in the Renaissance and the birth of an empire by avoiding risk and encouraging compromise. Eternally faithful to England, Elizabeth carefully cultivated an image as the protectress of a thriving nation, stamping an emblematic image and legacy as the Virgin Queen. The mask was both figurative and physical. It was a display of power, but it also concealed her traumatic upbringing and her true feelings. The perpetual youthful image was a major key to her success, but it would ultimately entrap and poison the Queen of England.